Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first quarterly Blink webinar. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tony Harris, and I'm one of the directors of BlinkMobile, and I'm also head of global sales and partners worldwide. I'd like to thank Mitch Bocking for his insightful presentation on Hornsby Shire Council and what they're doing with BlinkMobile. At the end of this, we're going to have a Q&A session. Now, we're not sure whether we should have the Q&A session at the end or at the beginning. We're going to be relying on your feedback from this, as it's our first webinar. And also, your feedback on these webinars is very important to us so we can get them right for you. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Hi there. I'm Alan Williams, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer of BlinkMobile, also one of the directors of the company. As part of my job, I get the opportunity to travel fairly widely around the world to many conferences, obviously to try and work out where we at BlinkMobile go with our product and our capabilities. But also, it's a great opportunity to understand where the mobile market, the enterprise mobility market, is going. I thought I'd use this session in this webinar to talk about the differences between enterprise mobility and the creation of what are being called hero apps, and why they are quite so different, and why you'd use a mobility platform. And what I'd like to do later on in this presentation is just talk about the way you as partners and users of the system can take advantage of the Blink Mobility platform to get vast increases in productivity for your business processes. So the first thing I want to talk about is the excitement building around the enterprise mobility marketplace. Now, there's a load of excitement out there because there are only so often do you get a major productivity boost for organisations. Those boosts come along, once every 10 or 20 years, and these boosts are boosts of 10 or 20% of increase in productivity. And the mobile marketplace and the mobile devices offer businesses a huge opportunity to look at their business processes, every single business processes within their organisation, and look for productivity improvements through just doing their job better, because by having effectively a computing device on their staff at all times, they can start to really do their jobs better. For example, be able to take photographs, annotate them, add comments, put them into business systems, get information when they're on the go, and be able to make far better choices, be able to do their jobs without having to go into the office so often. All these sorts of things are going to make huge differences to business. The commentators, and I've got a comment here up on a slide by Richard Absalom, who's one of the foremost thinkers for Ovum Consulting. Richard's really pointing to the fact that the enterprise mobility market, this area of improving your business processes through mobility, is really on the cusp. It's only just starting now. And part of the reason is that it's taken a while for enterprises to get around a few of the mechanical things about getting devices into the field. I mean, first of all, they've got to think about how what sort of device policy they're going to have. Is it going to be bring your own device? Are they going to give devices out? How are they going to secure them? How are they going to manage what's on them? Those are exercises that they've got to go through before they then start thinking, well, how am I then going to improve my business processes? Because, of course, you've got to be really careful about security and information and all those sorts of things out there. You don't want the devices falling into the wrong hands and your information being compromised. So those things have exercised a lot of corporations over the last few years. What's happening now is that the attention is going towards, well, what do we do next? And of course, the first thing that happens is that people look for the big productivity gains. And typically people will have a few hero applications they'll develop. And one of them almost always is the application that will connect the company to its end users. For example, if you're an airline, it's the booking application, it's the check-in application. If you're a council. It might be the front end that you give your ratepayers to find out information about things happening in your regional authority, your local authority. But that's only one app or two apps per organisation. And of course, those are very important ones. They're the main touch points between the organisation and their end users. But it's actually that doesn't give you productivity improvements per se. What you'll also find, though, is that organisations are looking for business processes that will give them huge increases in productivity. And typically they'll find one or two in an organisation that cover the whole place and will give them great productivity increases. These are the ones we call hero apps as well. They're internal hero apps, but it's worth organisations spending a lot of money and time and lavish attention and design on those apps. And that costs money. It costs lots of design time, it costs lots of development time, especially if they're going to develop over lots of different platforms. Now, those hero apps are important. People have cut their teeth on them, but the real opportunity for enterprise mobility is wider than that. It's across the whole organisation. And that's where we started to say, okay, well, wait a minute. Is the way that I develop apps across every part of my organisation where I'm going to get a productivity increase the same as the way I do my hero apps? The truth is that it's not, because the amount of time and effort you spend on your hero apps is going to be huge. The amount of time that you spend on every one of those other apps around your organisation can't be the same. You'll go broke. It costs too much. It costs too much time to build, too much time to maintain, etc. So what we're seeing now is a change in the way that organisations think about developing all of their mobility across their organisation. And that's starting to look at activities and how those activities can be improved by mobility. What we're encouraging organisations to do, and what some of our partners are becoming very adept at, is looking at the various business processes in different departments in an organisation and saying, what do I need to do to get a productivity improvement? Maybe it's half an hour a day, by doing one or two things really well. And doing those with the mobile, connecting them to the back-end systems, one or maybe more, and not trying to boil the ocean, not trying to take a whole system and get it down onto the device, but instead look at the activities one by one and say, how can I get a productivity improvement, and plumb it in. And if you do that across many different departments, you're going to get an increasing level of saving and productivity improvement across the whole organisation without having to do too much. But what you are going to have to do is build loads of apps. And it's the building loads of apps that many organisations get concerned about, because apps take time and effort and design to build. And that's where the Blink Mobility platform and other platforms can really help to organisations to deal with that complexity. And so, the connection of and the building of these enterprise apps is fundamentally different. If you're doing do them quickly, you're going to have some ready-to-go components. You're going to have to be able to build these things within a very short time. I mean, you've got to go from thinking about building an app over a 6-month or 3-month period to building an app over a couple of week period. And the reason is that you've got lots of them to do, and agility is absolutely key. You're going to have to build these rapidly, you're going to have to maintain them all the time, improve them all the time, and you're going to have to know when to stop trying to build for a particular department. The idea of failing quickly is really important, because if you don't fail quickly, you end up with exercises that can go on for, say, 2 or 3 months trying to do mobility for a department, and in the end they don't use it. So one of the great things about a platform is that you can build your apps quickly and then fail quickly. We had at a recent user conference a great example from Sunshine Coast Council, who described how they quite often build an app in one sprint of a week or a couple of weeks to try it out in a department. And if that department doesn't warm to it, if they can see that the department's not ready, they don't pursue it. I think that's a very important thing to be able to do, to fail quickly. So when you start building these apps with a platform like ours, you've got the opportunity to look across your organisation, identify the interactions that are going to make the difference, put them together quickly, get them in front of the users, and get the users to really own that process, to get really enthusiastic about it. And the way you do that is by getting stuff in front of them quickly and showing them, giving them an idea of how it's going to be in the field, and trying to get them to help you design what's going to work for them. And the more you involve them, and the more that they feel ownership of it, the more they're going to want to get this out into the field. And again, you'll see some later on in the webinar, Mitch Bocking from Hornsby Shire Council talking about what they've done in this way. It's very exciting, and to see how getting a user-oriented process activity can really make a difference. So. The other thing about an enterprise mobility platform, of course, is that it's, the idea is to get lots of apps out there. And with the Blink Mobility platform, remember that it's an all-you-can-eat platform, which means that you can have as many apps, as many forms, as many users on the platform as you want. Once you've established your mobility platform price, that covers as many answer spaces, as many forms, as many users as you want. That's very important because the marginal cost to put a new application in is the time it takes you to put it together. There's no more licensing costs, there's no more other hidden costs involved in getting that going. And that's why we encourage you to get, once you've done your first couple of processes, look for more, because you will find additional benefits across your organisation, and there's very, very limited cost of getting to the next one. People like Gosford City Council, for example, have put in 45 or 50 different forms very quickly into their organisation, through their organisation, because there's no limit. And I believe that they're moving forward beyond that now as well. And that's common across our user base. So we really do encourage you to take advantage of that all-you-can-eat aspect of our licensing. Lastly, about the platform, and the platform's obviously about very rapidly developing these apps and deploying them, and the ready-to-go components of the system are what allow that to happen. But the last thing I want to talk about is the neglected half-time win, and in BlinkMobile Quarterly, our magazine, I make a point about this. One of the things about mobility is that it doesn't have to be done in one big lump. You don't have to connect your mobile front end to your back end systems immediately. Obviously, that's the ideal would be to do so. So you've got straight through processing back and forth into your back end systems. But if you're just not ready to do that, you can still get significant gains in productivity by getting your users using a mobile app and taking that data and storing it in some sort of intermediate data store. And the reason that it's a benefit is because it reduces potentially travel times, it takes advantage of the devices that are on the users, it reduces rekeying, it reduces errors at the front end of data input. You get all those benefits you get from mobility anyway, and you're just not going the final mile to the back-end systems. You're going to an intermediate data store, and then you can look at ways to get from that data store with, obviously more qualified data back into the back-end systems. Now that's a real advantage in its own right, and of course it means that you can get those field-based systems out there really quickly, because you're not going to be worried about the intimate linkage into the back-end systems. Obviously, I'd like to do that later on, and that's a piece of plumbing that can be done later on. But don't neglect the half-time win that you get. You can put in place through a system, through using a product like the Blink Mobility platform. So, really, what I'd like to finish with is to encourage you to think about mobility in your organisation as much more than one or two processes. Start to think of how every single business process in the organisation can be improved, and don't be afraid of trying things out. Get the prototypes out there. They can be done very quickly with our partners or through your own staff. Get those prototypes out there. You don't have to do the plumbing to the back end to start with. You can get the users enthusiastic about what they can do. You can sometimes go to the halfway stage and get data going to and from the devices from an intermediate store. But most importantly, you can actually move quickly across your organisation and get productivity improvements. And that is going to be the really exciting part of enterprise mobility as you begin to see the 10, 20, even 30% improvements in productivity that we've seen in some of our customers. I hope you enjoy the rest of the webinar, and thanks for listening.
My name is Sam Stevens. I'm here this morning with Mitch Blogging from Hornsby Shire Council, and what we're going to do today is run through a case study. Mitch has been working in the site inspections, looking to mobilise their workforce, the guys that are going out into the field and inspecting sites, obviously. And what he's going to do today, a lot of you have probably already read his article that was in the recent Tech Quarterly. And what he's going to do is run through the demo live and show us what he's built and how he's taking advantage of mobile technology to mobilise his workforce. Mitch, over to you.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, if you haven't read my article, it's on page 27. It's a fabulous read, so I suggest you do. As Sam mentioned, this is about our site risk assessments that get conducted out on site before the council crews commence work. So this is a new version that we've developed for our asset operations group, and we will then retrospectively apply that back into the other areas of council. So this version, as you'll see, supports traffic control plan diagrams, also the ability to annotate those diagrams based on the actual worksite, and it can also take photos and annotate those. For example, if there's a site-specific risk, it's all about WHS as well. And one good thing we did with this form is we got our WHS department involved. It helped us create one form across council instead of, as I've said in the article, everyone having their own copy of the form and everyone having the best copy of the form. So in this case, we've got work sections. Every work section of council has different risks. For example, asset operations, which will be today's example, has different risks to, say, natural resources or park rangers. And that means once I select the work section, that controls what safe work method statements are displayed, what risks are displayed. But if I select asset operations, that'll then load up the form. And these are all the risks specific to our asset operations. So things like working outdoors, all those risks, cleaning and refueling equipment. But also the first thing it's going to ask me for is my safe work method statement. So we have a business rule. There must be at least one of those applied. Like I said before, our WHS department was heavily involved in this, and our main priority was to keep them happy. So these SWIMs or safe work method statements will be specific to the asset operations group. So if I pick, for example, footpath construction, I can add additional SWIMs, but if I look at the risks, one thing I wanted to do with the design of this form, I wanted to define a risk only once. So for example, traffic is one we'll look at today, so that every part of council has the same. If they have the risk of traffic in their work, then they all share the same one, not all different versions. But before I do that, if I have a look at another risk like UV sun, I just say it's applicable. I have to rate the risk before as it stands, then I apply one or more control measures. For example, sun protection, sunscreen and so on. So that then results in a controlled risk, just in that quick example. So I have an uncontrolled risk, I then apply one or more control measures, and that results in that risk now being controlled. I think they often use the term the risk has been treated. Another design principle I wanted here, if I look at traffic, every work section that has that risk present, they share the same version. of that risk. Therefore, it will have the same control measures, which is shown here. So if another crew, like say park maintenance, if they have the traffic risk as well for some of their work, they will end up getting the exact same version of the risk as asset operations and anyone else. So if I do need to change a risk, I just change it in one spot. It instantly applies across all work sections. As I said before, I like to keep WHS happy. So for traffic, I've got control measures like high-vis clothing, safety barriers, a spotter, for example, but one that's of specific relevance here is the TCP, or the Traffic Control Plan diagram. So when I turn that on for the risk, and of course that control measure only applies to the risk of traffic. It doesn't apply to other risks. That then gives me access to a gallery. And I've got on here my traffic control plan diagrams. I can select one of these, and then I can just use that diagram, and then I've got the ability to annotate it. So, for example, if this was not Hornsby Council doing the work, they might have said that's the work area. But since Hornsby Council does a lot more than that, I can easily clear a diagram. This is what Hornsby Council will do. And yes, I did sneak in a little plug there for Hornsby Council. So obviously their teams work pretty hard, so they've got quite a large area to work on that day. What I've also done with these diagrams is allow them to treat them as just a sort of a checklist. So you probably can't read the words here, but I can just tick off each of these to say that yes, I've done that for this specific piece of work that I'm doing. So road names, TCP must be attached, and so on. They also have to mark the direction, so that's north. Big boys with big fingers will tend to use a stylus for marking these diagrams, but we don't have one of those today. But I can mark up that diagram until I'm happy. As I said before, I can clear it. Once I'm happy with it, I just save it, and that becomes a final or a part of the record when I submit it. What I can also do, I've got all the other, there's quite a few risks here, but on any given piece of work, they'll only be obviously working on a small subset of them. So working outdoors is the one today. If I looked at another risk, I'll see it's got different control measures again, and so on. Probably not relevant for this one, but I'll include that. So once they've done that, what they can also do, they can add photos if they wish. Now, we're in the Blink office today, so there is no such thing as a problem, but I've got to try and find one. We'll just pretend that's a problem over on the floor there. What I can do here, let's say that's out on site and they've identified a problem, perhaps something that's dangerous to the crew. Whoops, I just used that photo. They can just circle the problem, or they can put an arrow, or they can do whatever, just to annotate the diagram, or sorry, the photo, and perhaps highlighting a risk. And once I save that, that too will become a final part of the record.
So these are generally photos of the site themselves that they're
there's things like, for example,
actually constructing.
Yeah, and that could be just a risk that they've identified out on site. They want to capture it.
Okay.
And it'll just include that. They don't need to annotate it, but often just helps to highlight it. They can give that a description if they wish. They can add another photo. Then as the final part, they just select the crew member, the crew leader, which will give Marshall something to do today. They, of course, have to sign it. We add our crew members. So I'll just get Zane because he's definitely needs something to do. And sometimes we have crews that come off crew members that come off another crew. We can add them in just in free format text. And again, we just capture their signature as well. So someone who can definitely need something to do. Can you just sign that, please? Thank you.
There we go. I'm hired for my new career.
Final thing, they just have to do their induction. A lot of these are mandatory fields. And once they submit that, that goes through to our electronic document management system, which is TRIM in our case. and that completes the process. So in short, that's demonstrated different work sections. Each work section has different risks and safe work method statements, and then each risk will have the exact same control measures regardless of which work section it uses. So prior to that, at Hornsby Council, probably others as well, every crew had their own forms with their own control measures, and nothing was really standard, and therefore WHS weren't happy, and you remember what I said about that before. So that's probably the end of the demo. Thank you for your time.
Hi, Alan Williams. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of BlinkMobile and also one of the directors. As you'll see, this section is called Risky Business. Now, you might be thinking that a Chief Technology Officer is keen to keep things moving forward all the time. And I am, but actually I'm really quite paranoid about upgrades to anything to do with my own computing environment. Certainly I'm quite well known for resisting upgrades to my Mac OS until the last possible moment, and when I'm absolutely sure everything's fine. And I'm sure many of you are like that as well, and particularly about enterprise systems. So what I'm going to do here is talk about the approach we're taking with the Blink Mobility platform to reduce risk and to make sure that upgrades and new releases are introduced with as few stresses and problems as possible. So I'm just going to go through two major aspects to managing risk, and hopefully it'll give you a sense of how we move the platform forward with in a nice, smooth and controlled manner. To start with, let's talk about what we call the main upgrade process, and let's start with a running production system. And so what you'll see in the slide here is our typical environment. It's not everything about our environment. It's really pointing out that there's a load balancer where all the requests for service come in, and the load balancer distributes those requests for service across different compute instances, which are basically virtual machines, and they sit in the Amazon infrastructure, and those in turn access your answer space configurations, etc., in a relational database system. And that is basically the core of a production system, and that sort of runs along in a very sort of fault tolerant and highly available manner. When we come to do an upgrade, what we do is we don't try and replace the code that's in an existing running environment. The first process we go through is what we call a release candidate stage. So once we've got a release code that we feel is strong enough to be tested by our customer base and our partners as a whole, we release it in a parallel environment, basically a completely separate parallel set of services within Amazon called which we call a release candidate. And that allows you to test all of your existing answer spaces, all the functionality, against the new release of our software without affecting your existing production environment. Now this process will go on until everybody who's tested are really comfortable that it's all working well. And once we're comfortable, we're down to minimal major bugs, and obviously most processes there are some residual issues at the end, but usually very minor. Once we get to that stage, we then prepare ourselves to go into production, and that is where the magic of Amazon Web Services comes into its own, because we have the capability then to do our cutover without actually bringing anything down, because what we do in our cutover is change the destinations of the load balancers from the old production system to the release candidate. A release candidate becomes the new production system. Obviously we boost the size of it up to full production capacity and everything, but the code remains exactly the same as the last thing that was tested. And so, again, now once we're comfortable, there's no change to the running code of the release candidate to make it production. What that also means is that the old production environment is still there. So if there's any problem with, a major problem with the release, with the new production environment, we can cut back onto the old production environment almost immediately. The actual time involved in switching from one to the other is in milliseconds. I mean, nobody will notice the cutover at all. And so it really is a 100% uptime move from one release to another. And so that in its own right has reduced the risk of upgrades. And we use this process both for major releases, which are very seldom, and the regular update process, where we update typically one thing in the system at a time. We still go through this process to make sure that we can go back to a previous running production environment in case there are any issues. And so this is our standard process, and as you'll see, that's it's a pretty seamless way of doing things. Okay, let's talk about the other area, which we've spent quite a bit of time on engineering the risk out of upgrades on a modular basis as well. So what we talked about just now was the movement of our main platform code between release to release. The other way you can reduce risk is by making sure that all the different components of the system can work with each other at different release levels. And so we can do modular releases. Now, if you look at the Blink Mobility platform, there are three main components that work with each other. Obviously, there's the main back-end core system, which you might regard as the core platform. Then there's the client software that we call it the Blink Intelligent Client, or BIC. And that's all of the software that lands on the phone or the tablet, the device. And then there's the app shell that surrounds the web app framework if you are producing it as an app for iOS or for Android or for Windows Phone soon. So each of those components, the web app, or the app shell, the BIC, and the platform, it would be ideal if we can move those forward individually without breaking the other parts as well. And in fact, that's what we've aimed at. So right now, you can move the version of the app shell on an answer space by answer space basis without actually changing the BIC or the platform that versions that it runs with. So it means that you can make improvements in the app shell, and we can release for you an improved app shell that only you need to upgrade to, and it can be done at your leisure, and it won't you don't have to move everything forward at the same time. The same is true of the Blink Intelligent Client. For those of you who are using BIC 3, the new version of the BIC, this is already in place. So with BIC 3, you can choose a version of the BIC, or a new version of the BIC can be released, and you don't have to upgrade. You don't have to be on a particular version of the platform. So we can move the BIC forward without moving the platform forward. Very important modular change. We are going to be doing this for the BIC 2 as well, and that will be in the next major release. That hasn't come out yet, but expect that later in the year. So just by modularizing the app shell upgrades and the BIC upgrades, we've de-risked a lot of the upgrade or the potential for issues with upgrades. The last one, of course, is the platform as a whole. Now, right now, in a multi-tenanted platform, you have to move forward when everybody else moves forward. It's a fairly low risk upgrade, but of course, it's on a particular day. You are that will happen alongside everybody else, and it happens for all answer spaces and all clients at the same time. Our objective is to make that an answer space by answer space upgrade to a new platform, and that means that we're going to have to put in what we're calling a version switch into the platform that will allow us to run multiple parallel live production environments of the platform and allow people to move from one version to the next at their convenience, and once they've tested all of their environment. That version switch is very much a live project in our R&D team, and that's what we're going to be moving to again, hopefully in the next major release, and you'll see that before the end of the year. So with that, we'll have upgrade modularity across all the major parts of the platform on an answer space by answer space basis, and that really will reduce the risk and of upgrades and allow you to test just for yourself and be, once you're completely comfortable, move across into the new environment. And we think that's will set everybody's minds at rest and allow you to sleep just that much better. Thank you.
I'm here to talk about evergreen apps. This is based on an article that Alan Williams, our CTO, wrote for our quarterly magazine. So if you haven't already done so, you should go read it. I'm the product manager. Today we'll be discussing a few of these terms. These terms get used a fair bit and in all kinds of weird little fuzzy ways. So hopefully by the end of this webinar, we'll have clarified these terms. So evergreen is an approach that allows you to deliver changes directly to your users. So you can make changes to your behavior or layout, you can fix a bug or add a feature, and that goes directly from you to your users. Ordinarily, without evergreen, you might have to go through Apple's App Store review process, which can take several weeks or months if there's a rejection. The web is naturally evergreen, and we use web technologies to make our forms and our interactions evergreen. Typical native and hybrid apps have evergreen components. So if you look at popular social networking apps like Twitter, the content for those apps is delivered in an evergreen fashion. You don't need to update the entire Twitter app to find out what your friend ate for dinner last night. However, if there's a bug in the layout or the behavior or the logic of the Twitter app, then they have to go through the whole app update cycle, which would involve an App Store review and isn't very direct. So the benefit of our hybrid apps is we've pushed as much of the behavior and layout logic into a way that can be delivered in an evergreen manner as possible. So that allows you to deliver updates to the behavior and layout and logic without having to go through the whole app update cycle. You only need to do an app update cycle if there's a change to the native specific functionality. So that might be something like a new API in iOS 8 or a new camera or a new sensor or something like that. Ordinarily, behavior and bug fixes can just be pushed straight on through to users. So what do we mean by offline? This is a really small word with lots of different implications, and so it's a bit of a loaded term. Generally though, offline means that stuff works good even if the network connection isn't good. But what stuff are we talking about here? So these are BlinkMobile components that are often associated with offline functionality. So we've got data suitcases and form records and the pending queue for disconnected forms. Even our interactions are offline accessible, except for Maddle interactions, because those involve the server. And if you can't talk to the server, then the server can't be involved. And the one we're currently working on is cold boot. So this is where the app can be accessed even if it wasn't already running recently. So yeah, what do we mean by cold boot? So we've got the level of cold boot that we're aiming at is primed cold boot. And this means that the user has to open the app to prime it, and they have to be online to do that. Anytime they open the app after that, though, once it's primed, it's good to go. So you don't need a network connection after that first time. Examples of that are web apps that have been enhanced with App Cache. That's an HTML5 technology. Our own iOS hybrid app already has this feature built in, and we're working on this for our Android and Windows Phone hybrid apps. So there's an extra special level of cold boot that native apps tend to have typically, and that's where you can open the app right after you install it, even if you were never ever online. So we're calling that anytime cold boot. At this point, it's unlikely to be able to deliver this in using web technology by itself, and it's a bit of a weird case because often your users will need to go online anyway at least once to do something. And even your favorite social networking app is pretty useless if you have never ever been online with it. So at this point, we're pushing it off into the someday bucket. So importantly, you can have your cake and eat it too. So cold boot has been a challenge for us because we've had to rethink how do we keep the evergreen goodness whilst giving you the cold boot goodness, and we have an approach that means you get to have both. That's it.
Six months ago, Parks and Leisure Australia engaged BlinkMobile to be a part of their annual conference. This was the 5th year running that we've supported this annual event. Instead of the many prior style of conference apps, which we sorted to deliver, everything from paper-based agendas to speaker bios, get me there maps, we wanted to attack this conference a little bit differently. We sought to gain the engagement and involvement from all the delegates there, both during and following the event, and provide PLA a forum to better interact with their staff and the delegates. We decided to cull a lot of information we would typically have included in the app, such as speaker biographies, session presentations, the Get Me There maps, and the static information that really played no part on an app directly. What we were left with was a new concept of how to deliver a conference app. A simple agenda comprising of a title, date, time, location, and a unique hashtag. A unique Twitter feed on each agenda item derived from the unique hashtag. The ability to tweet directly from the app on the agenda item rather than using a third-party application. Having each agenda item added to the device's calendar rather than using stars. Flickr integration to allow a stream of photos to the device from the conference's Flickr accounts. The ability to upload pictures directly from a device into the conference's Flickr accounts. And more importantly, a lead generation form on every sponsor's page that went directly through to the sponsor's email contacts. Moving away from the standalone method in place, we identified a newer, faster, and more efficient way to create the agenda through the Blink Mobility platform. What has previously taken 10 hours worth of data entry now took less than 2 hours. Authentication for Twitter was handled by OAuth. Now, at this point, I'd like to introduce Sam Stevens just to give you a brief outlay of what he did to integrate Twitter into the application.
No worries, thanks, Jay. Jay's mentioned OAuth. Essentially, this is the method we use to validate the user with Twitter. The idea behind the Twitter integration was to allow the users to actually view the live Twitter feeds within the app, but also to post their own comments directly from the app as well, instead of sending them out to either their own Twitter app or via the website. So basically what we're doing is looking at putting everything within the app and giving total control. So that obviously brings up the issue with how are we going to validate users. Now, OAuth, as Joe mentioned earlier, is essentially a service which allows you to authenticate a user with a remote site such as Twitter, and bring back control to the app. So the method with Twitter, essentially what we did, we had the login to Twitter icon on the front page. When the user clicks on that, what will pop up is what we call the child browser window. Essentially, it's a window that pops up on the page and directs the user seamlessly over to the Twitter website. Now, once on Twitter, they can log into their own account there. So the important part here is they're actually entering their username and password into Twitter. And once they've signed in, what Twitter does is pass a token back to our own app. Essentially, that's basically the method of authentication. We'll go into a little bit more detail later on. But by holding that token on the device, that essentially allows us to validate the user. They're a real Twitter user, and then from there, these people can then post a tweet on their own feed. Flickr was a little bit different. As with all of these services, they all have their own interesting terms and conditions. Twitter do have an API. They do also allow OAuth authentication, but what we found with this one was it actually ended up being easier to integrate directly with with Flickr's email system. This is for a couple of reasons. As you know, when you take a photo on a mobile phone, the image is going to come out very high resolution. You end up with a giant photo. We're talking a couple of megabytes worth of photo, and transmitting that over the phone system can obviously take a little while unless you have Wi-Fi. So what we did was employ one of the Blink forms. Part of the standard features in a Blink app is the ability to shrink down images on the device before you send them remotely. So what we allowed was the user could take a photo on their device. The Blink app shell shrinks that photo down to a much more sensible size, and then submits that again via the BlinkMobile's email system through to Flickr, and Flickr lodges the photograph within the particular account we set up.
At this point, I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough of the app. I must stress that the features we talked about in this session can only be achieved by appifying the answer space. Now, having a look at the app, again, this is the actual home screen itself. I've taken the liberty of signing into Twitter already, so that way we don't have to muck around with username and passwords. But essentially, the app itself will remember the user each time it comes back in or you reopen the app. So having a look through at the agenda quickly, it's broken down into day, and that's the beauty of demonstrations live. It's broken into day and then room, and the actual agenda item itself. Now here, as you can see, we have an add to calendar option as well as a Twitter feed directly. Now you can see the the tweet box. It's pre-populated with the hashtag. We did this to force users to use these particular hashtags to ensure that all the tweets, and particularly this conference, was trending on Twitter. Simply by tweeting directly from the app, we're using the app to tweet. We're not going to a tweet deck, and we're keeping the users inside essentially this particular walled garden. Now we added another neat feature where we would have the agenda directly add itself or add the item to the calendar. So rather than using stars and data suitcases, we thought we'd integrate it with the device's native features such as the calendar. So by simply adding to calendar, that particular item is added, and it will update you via reminders during the course of the day when you've got items appearing within your calendar. Having a look at the pictures now, the photo stream taken directly from Twitter is a simple feed of all the pictures that were taken during that particular day. And again, as you can see, it's just a number of pictures. This was all content that can be used for the particular conference next year. And again, the conference organisers were really happy with this. it allowed them to have fresh content. It will allow them to have fresh content each year. Now, I'm not going to go through and upload a picture because this account is still live, and this is the client's account. Finally, having a look at sponsors, and we'll just select A Play there. With the sponsors, again, the beauty of doing demonstrations live, going into sponsors and clicking on A Play, it allowed us to have a bio for A Play. And again, a simple lead generation form which would submit to the to the sponsors' email contact. If you want to have a look at this app yourself, you can go through and check it out through the magazine. There's a link to download it directly for iOS and Android devices. So at this point, I'd just like to reintroduce Sam just to discuss the benefits of how OAuth can be used for other applications.
Now, when we were going through the Twitter information before, one of the things I mentioned was when we're logging in, we're actually sending the user to the Twitter's website, and then Twitter's sending a secure token back again. Now, just that that particular feature gives us a lot of there's a lot of benefits. The first one, the big one, is it's much more secure, especially for the user. When they enter their details, they're entering it into Twitter's website, not ours. They're not entering it into the app at all. So that totally separates the user's input from our particular app, which when you're developing an app like this that takes a lot of the security burden off you because Twitter's handling all of that. All we're seeing is basically a giant random token. The second benefit of that is you also don't need to manage, store, or create user accounts as well. It's actually a really handy way of rapidly producing these apps and authenticating users by using existing services. Well, we've been speaking about Twitter in this particular case, but there's OAuth in particular is very popular, and a lot of different services will do this. So Twitter, Facebook, a couple of the obvious social networking ones, LinkedIn, Gmail, the entire Google system, there's Microsoft ones. There's essentially what we're doing is harnessing existing login details in existing systems, allowing them to take care of all the security side of it, and then we're just grabbing the authentication back again. I've already mentioned the next point here on the slide is it does lessen the security burden. You don't need to worry about actually taking people's credentials and then worrying about how you're going to store them securely. We don't have to worry about storing them on a remote server or even on the local device. So it actually takes a lot of the work off you as well. Being single sign-on is obviously a lot easier for the user as well. They don't need to create new accounts. They don't need to remember new passwords. They don't need to go through the steps of actually creating a new account either. So for this kind of app where I believe we wouldn't have actually had as many sign-ups, rather, if they actually did have to go through the steps of signing up, by harnessing accounts they already have, someone who might look at it and go, oh, no, I can't be bothered signing that form out. If they see, hey, log in with Twitter, no worries at all, might as well, I'll check it out. So I believe that it can actually increase, in a lot of cases, increase your usage in the field as well, because it's just a lot less work for the user to do. The method we used, I sort of touched on this a little bit before when you click on a login button and it brings up the child browser window, which essentially allows you to bring the content of a remote site in and display it to the user without kicking them out of the app. So we're not moving the user over to Safari, for example, or an internet browser. They're staying within the app the entire time. Now, this same method can be used from any number of providers. We spoke about OAuth, but there's also a lot of similar systems, a lot of different single sign-on systems, which will allow you to use the exact same technology and have the same effect. And we'll probably talk about this possibly in the Q&A section of there. But all of this work we've done is available to you as well, example code, that kind of thing. We're happy to discuss it and help you out as much as you like.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sam. Look, finally, as a direct result of the work we undertook with this particular app, we saw the uptake rate of this app from the delegates rise from 15% from last year's conference through to 84% with this year's conference. Engagement methods had all the PLA hashtags trending on Twitter over the 3-day conference, and the PLA administrators have, again, fresh content to use for next year's promotion of the actual event. Moving away from the actual conference side of it and how this could be applied in other real-world scenarios, councils can be generating ratepayer media content and using that as through their online campaigns. Airports could be have users directly tweeting as they enter into the or as they leave the departure lounge, and all enterprises can be interacting with their clients and business partners directly through the one app. Now, I hope you've taken a lot away from this session. Again, as Sam touched on, we'll be answering more questions during the Q&A later on in the webinar. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
My name's Ray Pearce. I'm from BlinkMobile support team.
I'm Rachel. I also work with Ray on support.
We look after all the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week support for the platform, and that does include looking after the services, making sure the infrastructure stays up, and general and technical support for our partners and clients.
Yeah, we've got 24-hour support, as you know. We've got pager, we've got an emergency hotline, so if there's any problems at any time of the day, we're here to help you.
And what we're talking about this morning is basically just going an overview of some of the pitfalls you may deal with when looking at developing the Android platform. Now, as part of the BlinkMobile support team, we've already done a lot of the hard stuff for you, all the compatibility issues with browsers, operating systems, devices, hardware, software, carriers, and a vast array of different things that make it the consistency of what you're trying to deliver to your customer.
Yeah, basically we've done all the hard work for you and just put it all together. It's part of the platform, and that should make it easier for you to deliver solutions to your customers.
So just some of the things that we've realised in the last 18 months or so of supporting the BlinkMobile platform. Originally, we saw a lot of applications specifically designed for iOS devices. We're now seeing a bit of a trend towards more of the Android market, primarily because of the cheaper, the vast array of different devices, sizes, screens, etc. And the poor little old Apple's getting a bit of a beating from the robot at the moment. And so this morning we figure we talk about some of the pitfalls that we've seen when people have tried to develop some of these solutions in the Android market.
One of the main reasons that we're seeing a trend towards Android as opposed to iOS is cost. You can get some pretty cheap Android devices compared to a decently priced iOS device. With our Android app shell and platform, as we said before, we handle most of the functionality in the native app shell code base, and we've put a lot of thought into keeping the user experience consistent across all the Android devices that are available. And as you know, there are plenty of different versions of Android and different Android devices available.
So let's look at today's Android market. You can buy devices ranging from $50 Australian right up to $2,000. You can buy tablets, you can buy phones, you can buy even washing machines, dryers. Everything pretty well these days has an Android thing in it. Effectively now you can wash your clothes, and when your washing machine finishes, it can send you a tweet and let you know that's finished. So choice is vast these days. So let's look at the Android market.
So in today's Android market, there are plenty of Android devices. According to statistics brought out in August, we've got 18,796 distinct Android devices. And of those devices, we've got a 43% market share with Samsung in the lead there. And unfortunately, only about 20% of devices are using the latest software, which isn't very much. When you think about it, not many Android devices are up to date with the latest software. So let's talk about software fragmentation.
Although the BlinkMobile platform has optimized to suit most browsers and operating systems, there's still a difference with Android devices. In many countries, a considerable amount of devices are still running Android 2.2 with a built-in open source browser, which is not a very smart browser at all. 93% of Apple devices are actually running on the latest operating system, and that becomes very difficult when you're trying to develop something with a fragmented market. When developing for Android devices, you really need to know the audience you're targeting and their deployment strategy. You always need to look at, there's going to be a pool of devices where you've got the latest operating system running 4.4 and you've got some people running back. Primarily, a lot of tablets that are delivered today still run Android 4, in particular Samsung devices, and their browsers are not very clever.
So when you're developing with Apple products, you've got very strict guidelines around what needs to be added and what you can and can't do. It's not the same with Android. There's much more flexibility, and in that case, we need to design our products with extra functionality, including extra security functionality, so that we're on par and we have a more secure solution. So some things that developers need to keep in mind is things like login security, domain whitelisting, and data sovereignty. Another thing that we can or should look at is privacy. Developers should always use secure protocols when delivering client data, and also use secure networks and try and eliminate any man-in-the-middle attacks.
Another area to look at with Android development too is the carrier interaction. A lot of carriers, in particular in Australia, will put on a lot of bloatware, other information, their own choice of browsers, their own type of navigation tools, etc. This can be quite painful when you're actually trying to develop an answer space with all these other things in mind.
We had one issue recently
That's right,
with Samsung and 4.1 devices, where Samsung had actually removed XPath from the device, and that caused us a great amount of issues. And that's just a great example of how the carriers can change an individual device and cause issues for customers, and make it difficult for them to run certain protocols and certain things.
Yeah, that particular problem was in New Zealand. It was to do with a particular Samsung tablet on a particular carrier. So we had to actually go and get a device and try and replicate that carrier, that device in that country. Another issue with carriers is often they will hold off releasing software updates, so primarily they can push you along with another hardware sale.
Absolutely. So Android's a great solution, and with every release we're finding less fragmentation. So it's a good idea to keep in mind that the market does have challenges, and there are some challenges that the ecosystem and other devices, even if they're cheaper, underpowered, sometimes they might not be an economical solution for that. So we've discussed the perils of Android related to hardware fragmentation, software fragmentation, security, and carrier customization. So some things to keep in mind when you're developing for Android might be ask for advice, ask us for help, ask questions, ask your support people questions like, what device should I be buying? And have a look at a device matrix showing what devices can and can't do. Do they have a camera? Couldn't they use the signature panel in our BlinkMobile platform?
So just to sum up this morning's topic, when dealing with the Android market and designing solutions for it, just keep in mind the following things. Hardware fragmentation. All hardware is different, different memory sizes, screens, physical buttons, etc. Always try to keep your design based around the minimal requirement you need.
We've also touched on software fragmentation. So with regard to that, remember that There are many different versions of Android out there in the wild, ranging from some really low versions, 2.2, all the way up to 4.4. And remember that only 20% of people have adopted the latest version of Android.
We've also talked about security, keeping in mind the difference with data sovereignty, using secure protocols when absolutely possible, making sure that your software or your answer space is not touching the devices, calendars, contacts, cameras, and particular microphones in particular to do with any privacy issues.
And again, we also looked at carriers and carrier customization. And that's where carriers can actually modify the version of Android, causing problems for users. So bear that in mind when choosing devices as well.
And again, if you've got any concerns about how you're going to develop it, firstly, know your audience, know your deployment strategy for your client. And we're always here to help you if you need any information, or you can contact your partner support or our pre-sales guys here at BlinkMobile.
We also have a device matrix available, publicly available on our help desk. So feel free to go there, have a look, see which devices are supported and which devices will run on cameras, signature panels, etc. And also another thing to be aware of is the difference between Android browsers. Some of the old browsers, they don't support certain parts of software, and just bear that in mind when developing for Android as well.
Yes, you can forget about your selfies, and most of them don't do selfies these days. So if you need any more information or any help from us, we're available at support@blinkmobile.com.au.
Well, hi everybody, and thanks for staying with us this long, and welcome to the Q&A panel. This is live, and we're taking your questions, and we've got a few so far. But before we head off onto that, first of all, just a couple of thank yous. Thanks to Mitch Bocking, who I can see is listening to this. Thanks, Mitch, for your demonstration. Fantastic, great app. Really demonstrates so much of what the platform can do. And Mitch won't be on the panel here. He's in Hornsby Council at the moment. Also, Jay, who did the section about the conference apps and all the sort of technologies that you might use, not just in the conference app, but in general applications as well. Jay's sort of behind the screens here, so he's not on the panel either. So the panel today consists of, over here we've got Sam Stevens in pre-sale support, we've got Ron Walton, our development manager, and we've got our support team of Rachel and Ray, who you saw earlier in the piece. So welcome to them all, and yeah, we look forward to passing questions that make them squirm. Well, not really. Okay, so let's kick off with a couple. Oh, just one other thing about this session. I mean, the session was really meant to cover the topics that were mainly in this BlinkMobile Quarterly and in this webinar. So we'll try and stick, to start with at least, mainly on those topics, and then thanks again for a variety of questions that we've got, and we'll move on to those. We're not trying to duck them, but some of those questions are very specific and probably are best dealt with, some of them offline, because it may, there's quite a few people on the webinar. So what I'm going to do is kick off with two questions around the actual business of offline, because Ron talked about that in his section, and evergreen and offline. And Ron, I was wondering if you can just perhaps talk about the difference in developing apps for offline rather than, or offline first, rather than sort of traditional online-offline apps.
Well, within our system, as I mentioned in my webinar, the Maddle interactions require a server. So when the app can't talk to the server, Maddle interactions don't really do anything. So I guess one thing that I would do if I was thinking about an offline first answer space is I'd try and identify static content that can be put in message interactions, because those will work offline. And you can also see today what your answer space would look like in an offline first hybrid app today in the web browser by just turning on offline mode in your answer space settings.
Okay, thanks. And this whole offline first thing is all coming into fruition fairly quickly. And in fact, there's a couple of questions a bit further on that Mitch has asked that allow us to sort of draw that out a bit more. Another question that's covered by, which is relevant to a couple of presentations, is you saw some great work with annotations that Mitch did. Do we need an app shell for those to do those annotations, or can it work in the browser as well?
So it's technologically feasible to do it in the web browser, probably not in IE8 or IE9 or IE10 maybe, so we've rolled out that functionality in the native apps first, and when we get around to rolling that out for web apps, pretty much depends on your feedback and your priorities.
Okay. Okay, we'll get on to some of the questions that came through on the session. Then Sharan, I hope that's the right pronunciation, asked a question about printing Blink Forms content, and we've got a couple of situations where that's being done from master spaces, and I'll just pass over to Sam, who's had some experience in that.
Yeah, it's a quite a project-specific question. We have, as Alan just mentioned, there has been a couple of projects that we've worked with printing in the field. Obviously, with mobility, printing in the field is not a common requirement, but there are projects that do require the ability to print. There's a project we worked with over in Chile actually, and this was PC based. Essentially with this project, what we were able to do was actually use the print function from the browser. It was run through the web app. There's another one we're looking at that can print dockets for people in the field, such as delivery drivers, that kind of thing. And that's using specialized technology, or a specialized thermal printer, using Bluetooth connected to your mobile app. And that's using basically a Cordova API that allows communications to that particular device. And on a more general term, we did a little bit of work with Brother as well for one of the projects we're looking at, where we're able to take again a battery operated thermal printer, which actually printed A4 pages. Pretty amazing for a thermal printer. And that's connected, we can either connect using, that particular one was AirPrint, Apple's AirPrint. There was a USB option or Wi-Fi option for Android. The answer to that question really comes down to your particular project. What kind of printer do you need? That's what is always going to circulate around. Are you using an app shell? Are you using a web app? Is this Android? Is this iOS? So what I'd recommend for that one, can we print in the field? Yes, we can, but it's definitely worth thrashing out project details with your partner.
Yeah, one of the things about printing in general is that, of course, most people aren't carrying printers around with them, and one of the obvious things is the preparation of PDF documents and then sending them out by email or some other way to get to somebody who's going to be buying a printer. So that's the more common way of dealing with with preparation of documents. There's another question here about ready application development frameworks. How do we fit with those? And I think that term generally is talking about things like jQuery Mobile and PhoneGap, Cordova, those sorts of things. And to start with, I'll pass this over to Sam. I think both of us will have some comments about this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as Alan mentioned, when you talk about frameworks like Cordova, like jQuery Mobile, these are frameworks which do their particular job very, very well. And keep in mind that this is just one part of the solution though. When you talk about Cordova, we actually use Cordova to build our hybrid apps. When we talk about jQuery Mobile, Big 3, which I believe we also had a question about, is based around the jQuery Mobile framework. So when you look at comparisons with frameworks like this, keep in mind that the frameworks is usually just one part of the solution. So when you look at the Blink platform as a whole, for example, the ability to produce apps rapidly and get them out in the field is not just about the framework itself. They're excellent tools. I personally love working with jQuery Mobile. But things like BlinkMobile's ready-to-go answer spaces, these are parts of the platform that allow you to rapidly build and deliver your solutions.
Yeah, one thing I'd add to that is that a platform, as Sam says, is many parts, and the other part to getting to agility is being able to do stuff like rich forms and things like that. Pretty much straight out of the box, and all your offline functionality is there. All that sort of complexity, the heavy lifting is done. So the idea of a platform is all about very quick, very agile, get stuff out, move on. And with the lower level frameworks, that tends to be a bit more heavy lifting you have to do rather than the platform. So hence that's why we talk about the platform as many things. Another part is of course the fact that the platform is a hosted environment. It's got all the robustness of hosting alongside it as well, and that's for development and for deployment, upgrades, all those things we've covered in this section. Next question from Mitch Bocking was about the Windows phone app shell, and when's it going to be available, and perhaps we can talk a little bit about its offline capability as well, since that came up in the last webinar we did. Ron, to you.
So as I spoke about in the webinar, we're keen to deploy our Windows Phone hybrid app with offline support baked in from the very beginning. And as I indicated, it's coming soon. Anything more solid than that is likely to be subject to change. So it's coming up soon. We're planning on having something that you can beta test by the end of October.
Okay. Well, thanks, Ron. That's so Mitch pretty soon, and the full offline cold boot style stuff that Ron was talking about will be in that Windows phone app shell as well, and that's because a lot of the stuff that has already been done for Android is going to be used in the same way in Windows. Another question from Mitch about bit 2 versus bit 3. What does it mean for a customer? A good question actually, and something we've been talking about bit 2 and bit 3 for a while. In fact, there's an article about it in the previous BlinkMobile quarterly pitch. BlinkMobile quarterly, but what I will do is I'll pass this over to Sam to have a chat about.
Yeah, jQuery Mobile was one of the. I should actually clarify that. Big 3. This is a. I'm not going to say the next version of the platform because it's not. But what Big 3 brings to the table is the inclusion of jQuery Mobile. So the jQuery Mobile framework that we sort of spoke about a little bit earlier. This is from the user point of view, this is the main difference. Now, having said that, with the project manager sitting right next to me, there is a massive amount of technical changes behind the scenes, and the guys have obviously done a lot of development on that part of it. But with the question relating to the end user, what does Big 3 bring to the table? That does circle around the jQuery Mobile. And one of the biggest things that jQuery Mobile is designed to do is to give give the end user a really nice feel. So you pick up the app, just things like scrolling through lists. You get a really smooth motion there. Side menus that pop out. If you click on like a side menu, you get one of those shifting menus that come out the side. Animations are really smooth. They have the ability to have the rapid ability to sense clicks on things. Most of you will know that have used a lot of mobile apps before. Part of the browsers in mobiles is actually a 300 millisecond delay when you tap on something. This is built specifically into mobile technology. But jQuery Mobile has the ability to remove that if it's not needed. So the result to the end user, when you combine all of these different things, is just a really nice, smooth, easy to use. It's just a warm and fuzzy feeling, I guess. That's from the end user point of view. I probably should. I want to touch on the developer side of it as well, because I actually do a lot of front end development using the jQuery Mobile and Big3 in our platform, and all of those things which end up being really, really nice for the user are actually really, really nice to develop on as well. The ability to add slide out menus, really, really easy. Things like searchable lists. Basically a lot of mobile functionality that looks great, works really well for users. The benefit from the people who are actually developing those apps, which is probably a lot of the people here, is it's just really, really easy to do, and it's just a really nice framework to work with.
Okay. If I can add to that, the other thing about jQuery Mobile, about the Big3, is about structure. So one of the constant promises we've made is to make the platform increasingly more extensible. And that extensibility is related to, well, how can I add things, extend the platform, and therefore extend, in this case, the Big, with confidence. And Big 2, you had to kind of be a bit sneaky with some of the extensions you did. And of course, many people have extended the Big 2, but with Big 3, much more structured, much more, you can extend with much more confidence than you could in the previous environments. And I think that's going to be very important. I mean, not just for our partners who are developing, but you guys out there who are developing your own extensions as well. And I think that's a common thing across our platform. We're looking to open up more APIs, more extensibility. I think it's fair to say that in the rush to make sure that the platform did its job of being agile, we limited some choices early on. And when we talk about documentation and things like that for development, we'll allude to that. And but for Big 3 is very much about extensibility as well. Okay. A couple of other questions. Mitch has also noted that Android versus iOS, some differences in behaviour that says iOS is normally better. And I think we recognise there are differences in behaviour between them. I'm not sure that we can say an awful lot more about that. We've got now with more people going with Android, I think it's fair to say from our point of view that Android is a absolute first order delivery platform for us. It's not just about iOS and Android at the side. It's very much Android, and it will be about Windows as well. So, do you want to say any more about the differences in behaviours?
Yeah, so I guess the thing I would suggest is when looking for what devices to roll out, if you've got any say in that purchasing decision, would be to focus on Android devices that have a good history of getting updates, because the updates can make a night and day difference in terms of reliability and performance, particularly with hybrid apps, particularly with the BlinkMobile services. So yeah, like I guess try not to be buying Jelly Bean devices now, and L is just around the corner, so try to focus on Android devices that are running the latest software.
Okay, thanks Ron. A couple more questions here, and I'll pass this one over to Ray and Rachel. There's a question here about is there access to full or what documentation is available to developers for developing apps in the BlinkMobile platform? So,
firstly, Alan, originally our documentation and training was based around the partner model, and most of our extensive documentation for developers is actually behind the partner firewall at this stage. We are actually working on a user version of that, but we do have some Canvas online training courses on how to create Blink forms, how to work with interactions, and some entry-level courses. And as I said, most of the information at the moment is behind the partner firewall. My best advice at the moment, while we're working on the next generation of documentation for the end user, is probably talk to your partner about some more. We publish some white papers and some self-help guides and things like that you could probably get from the partner.
Yeah, aside from that, like Ray said, we've got basic education courses available to the end user, but that would be basic form building or basic interactions. So nothing really high end. If you've got specific questions about a problem that you're having when you're developing on your answer space, ask your partner. They should have some documentation available for you or be able to answer a question regarding the development that you're doing.
And if they can't help you, we'll get all the information together and pass it on to them as well.
But suffice to say that we're quite advanced now with, and Ray has been working on getting the documentation in a form that can be used by end users as well. So that is a current project for us. I think that's pretty much all of the questions that we've got, and. Yeah, there's a couple of quite specific ones here, Sharon, that perhaps are rather than on a wider basis that we can deal with one-on-one with you because they're quite detailed. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. One of the things we'd like to do for the next webinar, which will be in about a quarter's time, is to prompt you guys for questions that you'd like answered in the webinar, so we can actually perhaps do some demonstrations and other things as well that would provide greater and more rich responses to some of your questions. We'll be putting in obviously articles about where we're going and new features as well, but part of the utility of these will be from answering real questions that perhaps we can be more thorough about answering. So, look, again, thanks for joining us. Thanks to you guys for being part of it, and we look forward to seeing you in a quarter on the next BlinkMobile webinar.